Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be going over all 12 books that I read in the month of February. Before we begin, I do have a few statistics about my ratings and the genres I read this month. I had 4 3-stars, 2 3.75s, 4 4-stars, and 2 5-stars. I read 2 YA dystopian, 1 YA fantasy, 3 romantasy, 4 romance, and 2 literary fiction. And half of these were audiobooks and half of them were physical books. But without further ado, let's get into the very first book that I finished in February. First up is Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. This was an audiobook listen for me, and I did give this 4 stars. This book follows Katniss and Peeta after they won the first Hunger Games. Having only watched the movie before reading this, I did not realize how much of this book was the political aspect of them touring and kind of helping undo the potential rebellion that they might have started. I thoroughly enjoyed this. It was very entertaining. It was very fast paced. I did enjoy the actual second games aspect of this book a lot more than the whole political aspect, but it was still very interesting to read about that nonetheless. I honestly don't have too much to say about this. This is just a classic at this point, and it's just very, very good. I liked it a lot. Next up is One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This is a physical book for me, and I gave this 4 stars. This story takes place on a island or kingdom called Blunder, and there is a mist that is slowly overtaking the island, and if you go into the mist, you basically start to lose your sanity and kind of forget who you are. There's also an infection that also gives people magic and makes them start to lose their minds, and the king, anyone who gets infected, he kills them. So there are also Providence cards in this story, and they are basically cards that each have a special kind of magical power they grant the user, and the user can use them and have magical abilities. That's the only kind of magic that they're allowed to have. And this story follows Elspeth, and she has a monster in her head, and it basically follows her trying to survive with this monster in her head and how he kind of affects her. It is a very interesting story. There's so much more to it than that. This is a romantasy, and it is just very entertaining as it follows Elspeth trying to help someone gather all these cards to get rid of the mist, get rid of the infection, and I thoroughly enjoyed this. This book is just from Elspeth's point of view, and I really enjoyed getting to see her interactions with the monster in her head, who she calls the Nightmare. This book is very atmospheric. It is a very gothic fantasy, so if you like that kind of atmosphere, I do think that this would be better to read during the more fall autumnal months rather than spring. I really enjoyed this nonetheless. I had a great time reading this. I was a little confused at first, but you kind of just have to keep reading and kind of trust that you'll figure out what's going on along the way. But overall, it was very enjoyable. I had a great time. Next up is Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. This is the 3rd and final book in the Hunger Games trilogy. This was an audiobook for me, and I gave this 3 stars. This book basically follows the revolution that is going on in Panem, and it was very politically driven. It didn't feel as fast-paced as the other books, and maybe I just wasn't in the mood to read this as much as the other ones, and so maybe that tempered my experience just a little bit, but I still enjoyed this. However, I just liked the other ones better. It was very interesting to see how the rebellion was going on around the country, and also see District 13 as well. It was very interesting to see that aspect of it and see how they survived. But in terms of everything going on, it was just there was a lot of propaganda in this book. I can't remember what term they used to refer to it as. They kept referring to it as a certain word. I think this was a good conclusion to the trilogy. I feel like everybody has either read these or seen the movies. I'm very excited for Sunrise on the Reaping that's coming out this month as well. Next up is Two Twisted Crowns by Rachel Gillig. This is the 2nd book in the Shepherd King duology, the 2nd book to One Dark Window. I did start reading this book on my Kindle, but I eventually did have to listen to the audiobook of it. I gave this 3 stars. I did not like this one as much as the first one, unfortunately. In this book, it follows Elspeth still. However, there are 2 additional POVs added in this book, and I just didn't enjoy them as much as just reading from Elspeth's point of view. And while the additional context and thoughts from other characters were nice, I just didn't enjoy reading from their point of views as much as Elspeth's. And I do understand why their point of view is added in this book. It does make sense to have at least one of them. I just really enjoyed Elspeth, and I wanted to see more of her in this book. This book basically just follows off of the first one of trying to gather all the Providence cards, and it just follows them on that mission. I did like it, but I just kind of found myself to be a little bit bored. I was reading this on my Kindle and I was kind of falling asleep at times, which is why I made the switch to listen to the audiobook of it. But I just don't think it was as interesting as the first one in terms of the suspense I was feeling. Next up is a literary fiction, and this was Blue Sisters by Coco Malors. This book follows three sisters. It follows Lucky, Bonnie, and Avery, and their fourth sister, Nikki, died a year ago? 2 years ago. She died not long ago, and basically it follows them as their parents are trying to sell the apartment that they grew up in, and all the sisters are kind of spread out across the world. Avery is a lawyer and she lives in London. Bonnie is a boxer and she is currently in California, and Lucky is a model and she is kind of all over the world, but I believe she's in Paris at the beginning of this. This book follows a lot with addiction and grief and the sometimes difficult family relationships that you can have with your parents and even your sisters, really. Each chapter follows a different sister, and the chapters are very long, and sometimes it feels very mundane. It doesn't always feel like there is a lot going on. You're kind of just reading about what they're doing. These characters are very flawed. They are addicts. They do some very questionable actions throughout this book. As someone who does not have any sisters and has not ever dealt with any form of substance abuse, getting to read about these characters was very interesting, and also the addition of grief in it as well was a very interesting, almost character study of each of these sisters. Despite these characters being very flawed, I did find myself to be rooting for them, and I really did want them to succeed, even though sometimes their actions were just so questionable. But I had a very good time reading this. It just kind of took a lot to read. The chapters are very long, and sometimes it's just like, what is going on? But nonetheless, I enjoyed this. I would be interested to read another book by this author. I know she has Cleopatra and Frankenstein out, but I'm not too sure, honestly, what that follows. Maybe I will eventually read that, I'm not sure. Next up is a very sad thing for me to say. I reread Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan, and this was once a 5-star. I think it is now a 3-star. Very sad to say that. This is a romance that follows Bree, and she has just gone through a very traumatic event in her life, and she basically is running away from that. So she goes to Maine, and there she meets Archer, who is the town's kind of recluse. He cannot speak. Nobody there makes an attempt to talk to him or interact with him. It's very taboo, and it basically just follows them meeting each other and forming a relationship. The first time I read this was back in 2022, I think, and I really enjoyed it. However, now I think my reading tastes have changed just a bit. The beginning I still found to be very sweet. However, as the story went on, kind of lost me a little bit along the way. There was just something in this book that happened so often, it felt very unnecessary. I found certain aspects of this book to also be kind of cringy and just not what I remembered them to be, and also felt a little bit repetitive as well. I think that this maybe just proved that my reading tastes have changed over the years, and I don't necessarily like what I once did. Or maybe I've just read more that I have different things to compare to and things that I like better. Next up was another little bit of a disappointment. This was Deep End by Ali Hazelwood. This is just another romance, and I gave this 3.75 stars. This just came out this month, and this was a very anticipated release for me. I had seen so much love for it. I love Ali Hazelwood. However, something about this, I just didn't thoroughly enjoy my time reading it. I did like Lucas as a character and really see how he cared for and loved Scarlett. I think that it was very sweet. I liked how he was able to pick up on so many things without her even saying them. However, Scarlett as a character just I don't think was my favorite to follow along and be in her mind. Also, there is a certain trope in this book where it focuses a lot on another character that just felt very unnecessary, and I didn't really like that character by the end of the book. I talked a lot about this in last week's video where I was reading this book in real time, so I don't want to say too much about it. This isn't my favorite Ali Hazelwood. Would I still recommend it? Maybe. I think it just depends on what you like. This isn't for everyone, I will say. Next up was another romance. I can't believe I read so many in a row, but this was Not in My Book by Katie Holt. I also read this in last week's video, so I won't say too much about it, but I gave this 4 stars. This was very easy. I read this in like 2 days. So easy to get through, very entertaining. This book follows Rosie and Aiden, and they are both students at NYU. They are both there for creative writing, I believe, and they both want to be authors. She wants to be a romance writer, and he wants to be a literary fiction writer. Basically, in their one class, they are always arguing. It is very cringy. I had a lot of secondhand embarrassment reading this, I will not lie. However, their teacher one day makes them come together on an assignment and write a book together, and I will say that that is when the story started to get a little bit better for me. I honestly wasn't sure how I was going to feel about it based off of those beginning interactions. I just sometimes don't always like an enemies to lovers in contemporary romance. However, I really liked getting to see how Aiden was slowly opening up to Rosie. He's very closed off, and I just had a very enjoyable time reading this. I would recommend this. It kind of gives like similar vibes to Beach Read in the terms of their like both authors. Very enjoyable, very easy. I liked it a lot. Next up is The Raven King by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the fourth and final book in the Raven Cycle series. I had previously read them for the first time in 6th grade, and so I listened to the first 3 books in 2023, never finished the last one. I decided to listen to it just because I love these characters, and oh my gosh, I just love these characters so much. They are amazing, perfect. I love them. This is a like YA fantasy, a modern fantasy if you will, but this book follows a group of boys called the Raven Boys. That's what the first book is called. It is Gansey, Adam, Rowan, and Noah, and it basically follows them meeting Blue, who is the daughter of this psychic, and she is so totally different from these very privileged, very wealthy boys besides Adam. It basically follows their friendship, and they are on a mission to find this Welsh king in Virginia. The whole series just kind of follows them and everything that happens to them along the way. This is the last book, and I just love these characters. They make me laugh. I just love them. I love them so much. They're so nostalgic for me to read these. I just had such a great time. If you want just a very easy, enjoyable series, definitely read the Raven Cycle series. Starts out with the Raven Boys, then it's the Dream Thieves, then Blue Lily, Lily Blue, and then finally the Raven King. But I just love these so much. These are a favorite of mine for all time. Next up is an audiobook that I don't have a copy of, and that was Margot's Got Money Troubles by Ruthie Thorpe. I gave this 3 stars. It is a literary fiction. It basically follows Margot, who is this 19-year-old girl, and she gets pregnant by her college professor, and she decides to keep the baby, and it basically just follows her journey. She has this baby, and now she has no support from basically anybody, and eventually her father comes back into her life, and he is like an ex-pro wrestler. He's an addict. It kind of just follows their relationship, and it also follows her deciding to go onto this website where you can have fans and like post yourself, if you know what I mean. It follows that whole kind of progression of her trying to make money from this. This story, as I was listening to it, I just never really knew where it was gonna go. The whole time I'm reading, I just didn't really know what the end goal was, and obviously I guess it's the stability. I suppose it was a kind of study into teen pregnancy, addiction, and kind of that form of work. I also found like certain aspects of this book to be very cringy. Next up was another audiobook. This was First Time Caller by B.K. Borison. I gave this book 4 stars. This was a very sweet romance. It basically follows Lucy, who is a mechanic. She is a romantic as well and a single mom. And it also follows Aiden, who is a radio show host, and he kind of doesn't necessarily believe in love anymore. But the whole thing is that his late night radio show that he hosts is about advice for love. And one night, Lucy ends up getting to be in contact with him through the radio show, and basically they have this whole conversation where she is kind of just describing what she's looking for in love, and eventually she is kind of on the show. They're kind of helping her look for love. It follows the relationship between her and Aiden, and it was very sweet. I enjoyed this a lot. I thought it was an interesting concept between, you know, like a whole radio show aspect, and I thought it was very sweet to kind of see Aiden slowly start to believe in love again and really had this admiration for Lucy and love not only her but all of her people as well. The cover is adorable. I want to get a copy of this and add it to my shelf, but I really enjoyed this. Would definitely recommend. I know a lot of other people have enjoyed this as well, so if you're looking for just a very sweet, interesting romance, I would definitely recommend this. Last up is Rebel Witch by Kirsten Ciccarelli. This was a 5-star. This is a romantasy. This is the second book to Heartless Hunter in the whole little Crimson Moth duology. I just finished reading this today. I'm still gonna count it as February because I read most of it in February. I only read the last like 100 pages today, but I tabbed this. I actually went to the signing for this. So fun. I went to the one at Half Price Books in Dallas, and I had so much fun. I really enjoyed getting to see Kirsten talk about this and kind of her process and thoughts for making this book. It really did put some certain things into context when I was reading this, because when I went to that, I hadn't read it yet. I had so much fun with this. It was so entertaining. It was just easy 5 stars for me. Heartless Hunter was one of my favorite books I read last year, and so I was so excited to read this. But this book really does just go right back into the story from where you left off. There was not a time throughout this book where I was bored or there was a dud where it was just kind of like nothing's going on. It was just very entertaining throughout. There was so much tension, so much yearning. You really got to see both sides really struggle with wanting the other person, but they just can't because they are on opposite sides. And there was maybe like one aspect of this book that I found to be a little bit predictable, but overall I really did not know what to expect with the ending. I didn't know where it was going to go, but the ending was so satisfying. I had such an amazing time reading this. So fun, so easy, just so bingeable, honestly. But I loved this. Those were all 12 books that I read in the month of February. I had a pretty decent month, I suppose. I feel like very few of these, some had some high ratings, but they didn't really stick out to me. So it was an okay month. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Let me know what your favorite book you read in February was, and I'll see you guys in next week's video. Bye!